Hello there, you're listening to the planet's memory where time breathes and the Earth remembers. There are nights when the world feels old, not just in years but in memory, as if the ground beneath your bed is holding its breath. If you listen closely, you might imagine a slow ticking that does not come from a clock on your wall, but from deep under the soil, under stone, under layers that have stacked up like heavy blankets for longer than any story you have ever heard. Tonight we follow that sound, not as a loud alarm, not as a sharp warning, but as a soft and steady beat, like a heart you can barely hear yet somehow trust. We are going to travel into the quiet places of Earth where time is kept in dust, ash, sand and ice. And we are going to ask a question that feels like a legend whispered beside a campfire, a question that makes the mind drift and wonder at the same time. What if the planet is not just a home, but also a record? What if it is a hidden diary? What if the layers under our feet are a buried clock, marking moments when people rose, built, dreamed, and then vanished, leaving only faint traces sealed away by the patient hands of nature? This is not a story about one king or one battle. It is not a simple tale of good and bad. It is a slow walk through deep time, told in calm words, like a bedtime river moving over smooth stones. We will meet scientists and diggers, careful readers of the ground, and also the people of long ago whose names we may never know. We will follow clues that are small, like a grain of pollen, and huge, like a band of ash spread across a whole continent. We will move through caves, deserts, oceans, and frozen plains. We will feel the hush of ancient ruins at dusk, and the quiet thrill of brushing dirt away from a stone that has not seen daylight in thousands of years. And through it all, we will keep listening for that gentle ticking, the buried rhythm of Earth's layers, the soft promise that time leaves footprints, even when it tries to walk away. Long before people wrote words on paper, the world wrote words in rock. Each year, rivers carried tiny bits of soil. Each season, winds pushed sand into drifts. Each eruption tossed ash into the sky like grey snow. Each flood laid down a fresh skin of mud. Over and over, these thin skins settled, hardened, and became layers. Some layers are dark, some are light. Some are rough with pebbles, some are smooth as flour. Some hold the shells of sea animals. Some hold pieces of plants that once drank sunlight, and some hold signs of us humans, in the form of charcoal from fires, bits of broken pottery, stones shaped by hands, and bones that once walked. If you could cut the earth like a slice of cake, you would see these layers stacked one on top of another. The deepest layers are older, the higher ones are younger. That simple rule is like the first word in the language of geology. It lets people read the ground like a book, turning pages without lifting them because the pages are pressed together by weight and time. But the ground is not a neat library. Earth moves, it bends layers. It breaks them. It folds them like cloth. Sometimes it scrapes old layers away and replaces them with new ones. Still, even with all that shifting, many places keep a clear order, a calm line of memory. And so, the idea of a buried clock begins with something quiet and basic. Layers are time. Layers are memory. Layers are events, one after another. When you think of it that way, the ground beneath you is not silent at all. It is speaking, slowly, in a voice made of stone and dust. The question is not whether it speaks. The question is whether we can learn to listen well enough to hear more than weather and volcanoes, more than rivers and ice. Can we hear the human notes too? Can we hear the rise of villages, the spread of farms, the glow of ancient fires, and the sudden hush when something went wrong? In a bright lab, under clean white lights, someone pours soil through a fine screen. The soil falls like cocoa powder. Tiny bits remain in the screen, little fragments that look like nothing at first. A seed, black and wrinkled. A sliver of bone. A bead made of shell. To many people it would look like trash, but to an archaeologist it can feel like a handshake from the past. There are people who spend their lives learning how to read these small signs. They do not usually call themselves treasure hunters. They are more like careful listeners. They learn the shapes of tools and the styles of pottery. They learn how a campfire stains the ground with charcoal. They learn what animal bones look like when they are cut by a stone blade. They learn how pollen grains can tell you which trees grew nearby. They learn how a thin stripe of ash can tell you a volcano erupted far away, and how that stripe can match another stripe in another place, helping you line up time like matching bookmarks. These people are not only in labs. They are in deserts with wide hats and water bottles. They are in jungles where insects buzz. They are in caves where their headlamps shine on damp walls. They are on rocky cliffs where they tie ropes and lower themselves down. They are in boats, taking cores from the sea floor, pulling up long tubes of mud that hold layers like stacked shadows. They are in icy lands, drilling deep into glaciers, bringing up cylinders of ice with bubbles of ancient air trapped inside. Each place is a different kind of page. Each tool is a different kind of pen. But the goal is the same: to see how the world changed and how people changed with it. Some of them are calm and patient, some are excited and loud, some argue, some disagree. That is normal. It is part of how humans chase truth. Still, even when they argue, they often share one deep feeling: a sense that the past is not gone, it is close. It is under our feet, and if we are gentle enough, we can touch it. Imagine standing on a hillside after rain. The air smells clean. The ground is soft. You see a little stream of water running down, carrying tiny bits of soil. It does not look like much, but that small stream is doing something powerful. It is moving the world, grain by grain. It is making future layers. Now imagine a cliff where the earth has been cut open by a road. You see bands of colour in the wall. A brown band, a yellow band, a grey band. You can trace them with your eyes like stripes on a sleeping animal. The highest band is near the surface, where roots still reach. The lower bands feel older, quieter, more sealed. If you press your hand to the wall, you are touching time. You are touching many different years at once, stacked together. For some people, this is the first time they feel the buried clock, not as a scary thought, but as a gentle awe. The idea that time is not just something that flies away, it piles up. It leaves marks, and sometimes if you look at the right place, those marks are clear enough to read like a calm bedtime story. But there is another feeling too, the shadow behind the wonder. If the layers record time, then they also record loss. They record floods that washed homes away. They record droughts that cracked the soil. They record fires. They record sudden cold snaps. They record ash that darkened the sky. And if humans lived through those events, if they built cities and temples and roads, then the layers may record their moments too, including the moments when their lights went out. Long before modern science, people told stories about lost worlds, stories of great cities swallowed by sand, stories of islands that sank under the sea, stories of golden ages that ended in storms and fire. Some of these stories may be pure myth, shaped by fear and hope, but some may be memories stretched and changed, yet still tied to real events. A big flood can become a world flood in a story. A collapsing kingdom can become a vanished paradise. A real place can become a legend. When people hear the idea of a buried timetable, they It can sound like those old rumours. It can feel like a secret pattern, like someone is hiding something, but the truth is quieter than that. The Earth does not hide things on purpose. It simply keeps going. It lays down new layers. It covers what was there before. It forgets in the way nature forgets. Not with hate, not with lies, but with gentle weight and steady time. And yet, even if Earth does not mean to hide anything, it still can. It can bury a village under mud. It can cover roads with volcanic ash. It can swallow coastlines when sea levels rise. It can shift rivers away from old cities, leaving them stranded in dry land. It can grow forests over stone walls, turning them into humps and shadows. It can do all this without noise, like a blanket being pulled over a sleeping child. The past goes quiet. Then, much later, a shovel hits stone, and the quiet breaks. Every great question has its own early life, like a child learning to walk. The question we follow tonight did not appear all at once. It grew from many small moments, spread across many years, across many minds. It grew when early geologists noticed layers. It grew when people began to dig and find old tools under newer soil. It grew when explorers found ruins half buried in deserts. It grew when divers found stone walls under shallow seas. It grew when scholars realized that the past was not just a few thousand years old, but much deeper. In the beginning, many people did not like this idea. They wanted the world to be young and simple. They wanted history to fit into neat boxes. But the ground did not agree. The ground kept offering hints. Old bones under old layers, old fires under older ones. Slowly, the boxes had to expand. The timeline had to stretch. And as it stretched, the idea of loss became more serious. If time is long, then many chances exist for things to rise and fall. The question, like a person, faced challenges. It faced doubt. It faced fear. It faced wild guesses that made serious scholars roll their eyes. Some people used the idea of lost civilizations to sell books full of made-up claims. That made careful scientists more cautious, more strict. They wanted evidence. They wanted dates. They wanted clear layers, clear tools, clear signs. In a way, the question had to grow up. It had to learn patience. It had to learn discipline. It had to earn trust. There is a kind of layer that is like a signature across the world. Volcanic ash. When a big volcano erupts, it can throw ash so high that winds spread it far away. The ash falls in a thin blanket, sometimes across whole regions. Later, that ash becomes a marker. If you find that same ash layer in different places, you can say, those places share a moment in time. It is like finding the same line in two copies of a book. Ash layers can help people build a timeline. They can help connect events. They can help show what was happening before and after. If a village is buried under ash, you know the eruption happened after the village was built and before the next layer formed on top. If another village far away has the same ash layer in its soil, you can line up their stories. This is one way the buried clock becomes more than a metaphor. It becomes a tool. It becomes a method. It becomes a real way to map time through the ground. And once you can map time, you can begin to look for patterns. You can ask, did many places change at once? Did many societies struggle at the same time? Did climate shifts line up with human troubles? Did droughts match abandoned cities? Did floods match sudden moves? Ash teaches a calm lesson. Nature leaves timestamps, not in ink, but in dust, not in loud letters, but in quiet grains that settle and wait. Rivers are not just water, They are moving memory. They cut valleys. They carry soil. They build deltas. They flood plains. They can feed farms and also destroy them. Many early civilizations grew near rivers because rivers gave them life. But rivers can also change their minds. They can shift their paths. They can dry up. They can overflow. When that happens, the people who depend on them must adapt, or leave, or suffer. In river valleys, layers can form quickly. Each flood leaves behind silt, a thin coat of fine soil. Over many floods, these coats stack up. If people lived there, their lives are woven into the stack. A floor of a home, then a flood layer, then another floor, rebuilt on top, then another flood, then another rebuild. Over time, the river makes a layered story of human struggle and human hope. Imagine a small town built on a riverbank. The people plant crops, they build ovens, they raise children. One year the river rises higher than usual. It spills into the streets. The water is brown and heavy. When it drains away, it leaves mud behind. The people clean up. They patch walls. They rebuild. The mud dries. It becomes part of the ground. Later, another flood comes. More mud. More rebuilding. If this happens many times, the town rises upward, layer by layer, like a slow-growing mound. In some parts of the world, these mounds exist. They are not mountains. They are human hills built from broken bricks, ash, trash, and flood silt. They can hold thousands of years of life in one place. When archaeologists dig into them, they are digging into stacked days, a buried clock made of human choices and river moods. Deserts feel empty, but they can be excellent keepers of the past. In wet places, plants grow fast. Roots break walls, rain washes things away. In deserts, the air is dry. Wood can last longer. Cloth can last longer. Even footprints can harden and remain for a while if the wind is gentle. Deserts can bury things in sand, yes, but that burial can also protect them. Like sealing a letter in an envelope, some lost settlements in deserts did not vanish because of a single disaster. They faded slowly. A trade route changed. A well dried up. A new power rose elsewhere. People left. Sand moved in. The wind covered doorways and streets. The desert did what it always does. It rearranged itself. And under that rearranged surface, the old place rested. When a modern team finds such a place, the feeling can be strange. You can stand on a dune and realize you are standing on roofs. You can brush away sand and reveal a wall that still holds the shape of a handprint in mud brick. You can find pottery with painted lines that still look fresh. It is like waking a sleeping city, except the city does not open its eyes. It simply shows you what it kept. The desert reminds us that burial is not always destruction. Sometimes it is preservation. Sometimes the buried clock keeps time by hiding it. Sea levels rise and fall over long periods. When ice melts, seas rise. When ice grows, seas fall. Coastlines shift. Places that were dry become wet. Places that were shallow seas become land. People have always lived near coasts because coasts offer fish, travel, trade, and rich food. But coasts are also fragile. A storm can reshape them. A tsunami can wipe them clean. A slow rise in sea level can move the shoreline year by year until homes are lost. Underwater archaeology is like exploring a dream. Light moves strangely in water. Sound is soft. Everything feels slower. But under the waves there can be old roads, old walls, old harbours, old stone tools lying where they were dropped when the water was not there. In some places, divers have found signs of ancient settlements now drowned. These finds do not always mean a great mystery civilization. Often, they simply mean people lived there when the sea was lower, and later the water rose. Still, the feeling is powerful. A town where fish swim through what was once a doorway. A stone circle where seaweed sways. It can make you think about how quickly a home can become a ruin, and how easily the ocean can seal a chapter of human life. The sea, like the desert, can both destroy and protect. Wood may rot in water, but stone can last. Mud can cover things and keep them safe from currents. The seafloor, with its own layers of silt, can become another buried clock ticking under gentle waves. In the coldest places on Earth, ice forms year by year. Snow falls, compresses, and becomes ice. Tiny bubbles of air get trapped inside. That air is like a breath from the past. Scientists drill deep into ice and pull out long cores, like frozen candles. They study the bubbles. They study the chemistry. They can learn about past temperatures, past storms, past dust, past smoke from fires, even past volcanic eruptions. Ice does not record human pottery or stone walls, but it records the world humans lived in. It records the sky, it records the air. It can show when the climate shifted, when the atmosphere changed. And if a climate shift lines up with a time when society struggled, that can be an important clue. Ice is a gentle witness. It does not shout, it simply holds. The deeper you go, the older the ice, the older the breath. When you realize you are holding air that was once inhaled by a child in a Stone Age camp, or floated over a farm in an ancient kingdom, the world feels smaller and larger at the same time. Ice is part of the buried clock too, though it is a clock made of winter, storing the rhythm of cold and warmth, the pulse of the planet's moods. To understand what it means for civilizations to be lost, it helps to think of a civilization like a person. It has an early life, it has growth, it has dreams, it has problems, it has turning points. It can rise, shine, struggle, and sometimes fall. And just like a person, it leaves behind traces, like footprints in mud, like a song remembered by a friend, like a scarf left on a chair. In the early life of a civilization, people gather and settle. They learn to farm or fish in steady ways. They build homes and store food. They share stories. They make rules. They trade. Their children grow up with a sense of place. Over time, small villages can become towns. Towns can become cities. People can build walls, temples, markets, roads. They can write. They can count. They can plan. Then come challenges. A drought, a flood, a disease, a war, a change in trade routes, a new group moving in, a bad decision by a leader, a series of small problems that add up. Civilizations, like people, are not broken by one moment alone most of the time. They are often worn down by many moments, by stress that keeps returning. Then come turning points, a new invention, a new alliance, a new crop, a victory, or, on the other side, a big storm, a long dry season, a sudden eruption, a violent invasion. Sometimes a civilization adapts and survives. Sometimes it changes shape. Sometimes it moves. Sometimes it breaks into smaller parts. And sometimes it ends in a way that feels final, leaving ruins and silence. The buried clock is what remains when the noise stops. It is the record of that life, pressed into layers, waiting. There are places where a city was caught in a moment, sealed by ash like a photograph. when volcanic ash falls thick and fast, it can bury streets, homes, and even bodies. Over time, the ash hardens. The city becomes a time capsule. Later, people may dig it out and see the shape of daily life, frozen in a quiet pose. Such places can teach us how a normal day looked long ago, what people ate, how they cooked, what they valued, what they feared. You can see the size of rooms, you can see painted walls, you can see tools left where they were used. It feels close, almost too close, because it reminds us that the past was not just kings and wars, it was also ordinary mornings, warm bread, laughter, and small worries. But the deeper lesson is about sudden change. A city can be busy and bright, and then, in hours, it can become silent. The layer of ash becomes a hard line in the ground, a clear tick in the buried clock. Before ash, life. After ash, stillness. When people study such a place, they do not only ask, what happened here? They also ask, how did the people live before it happened? What were the warning signs? Did the ground shake for days? Did the sky smell strange? Did anyone have time to run? And what does it mean that a whole community can be paused by nature? This is one of the reasons the question about lost civilizations feels emotional. It is not only about mystery, it is about empathy. It is about seeing ourselves in those who came before and realizing how fragile a normal day can be. Not all endings are sudden. Some are slow enough that they feel like a long sigh. Imagine a region where rain begins to fail. At first it is only a little less. Crops still grow, but not as tall. People worry, but they hope next year will be better. Then another dry year comes. Wells drop. Rivers run thinner, animals wander farther for water. People argue more, leaders promise solutions. Some families leave to find better land. The ones who stay work harder. Then the dry years keep coming. Food stores shrink. Trade becomes harder. People who once paid taxes in grain cannot pay. Soldiers cannot be fed. City projects stop. Temples cannot be maintained. The rich protect what they have. The poor suffer. Disease spreads because bodies are weak. The society begins to fray, like cloth pulled too tight. If this continues long enough, a city can empty without a battle. Streets that once rang with voices become quiet. The roofs collapse. Dust gathers. Later, when rain returns, grass grows in cracks. A new group may move in, using old stones to build new homes. Or the place may stay empty, a shell on the land. In layers, a slow disaster can be harder to see than a sudden one. There may not be a sharp ash line. Instead, you might see changes in plant pollen, showing different crops. You might see less building debris, suggesting fewer repairs. You might see more signs of malnutrition in bones. You might see a shift in trade goods. The buried clock still ticks, but the ticks are softer, blurred, like footsteps in dry sand. This kind of ending can feel even sadder because it carries hope for so long. People keep trying. They keep believing. They keep planting seeds into dry soil, wishing for rain. The ground remembers that wish. For a long time, people could only guess the ages of layers. They could say one is older than another, but not by how much. Then came a turning point, a kind of new sense, like giving eyes to someone who only felt with their hands. This was the ability to date things using natural clocks inside the world itself. Some materials change in steady ways over time. Some elements break down at predictable rates. When scientists learned how to measure these changes, they gained a way to estimate ages. Not perfectly, not always, but often with enough accuracy to build real timelines. With this, the buried clock became more than a metaphor. It became measurable. Now, a piece of charcoal from an old fire could be dated, a bone could be dated, a layer could be connected to a time range. Suddenly, archaeologists could place events in order not only relative to each other, but on a broader timeline. They could compare far places. They could ask if collapses in different regions happened near the same time. They could test ideas instead of only telling stories. This was a rise moment for the question itself. The question grew stronger, more grounded. It could now face skepticism with better answers. It could separate the real from the imagined. It could become a careful investigation instead of a dreamy rumour. Yet even with better dating, mysteries remained. Because evidence is never complete. Because the earth is messy. Because time breaks things down. Because many human lives leave no stone buildings, only light marks that fade. And because even when dates line up, causes can still be hard to prove, the buried clock can tell us when. It can hint at how. It can sometimes suggest why. But it rarely gives an easy confession. It makes us work. It makes us humble. At some point, scientists and historians began to notice something that felt like a whisper. In different parts of the world around certain times, many societies seemed to face stress. Droughts in one region, floods in another, cooling in another, famines, migrations, conflicts. It did not mean a single global disaster every time. It did not mean one hidden enemy, but it suggested that nature's changes could push many human systems at once. Think of a civilization like a carefully balanced stack of stones. When the weather is steady, when trade flows, when crops grow, the stack can stand tall. But when stress comes, when harvests fail, when trade breaks, when leaders fight, the stack can wobble. One stone slips, then another. Sometimes the stack can be rebuilt, sometimes it falls. When you look at many stacks across the world, you might see that certain times were shakier than others, not because people were weaker, but because conditions were harder. This is where the idea of a timetable begins to sound possible. Not a magical schedule carved by fate, but a natural rhythm of climate shifts and disasters and human responses. The Earth has cycles. Oceans warm and cool, ice grows and shrinks, rain belts move. Volcanoes erupt now and then. The sun's energy changes slightly over long times. These cycles are not perfect, not like a metronome, but they exist. And if human societies are tied to water and weather, then those cycles can influence the rise and fall of civilizations. This is not a story that removes human choice. People matter, leaders matter, culture matters, technology matters, but nature sets the stage. The buried clock may be the stage manager, moving props quietly, changing the lighting, shifting the mood. To make this journey feel real, let us imagine a child in an ancient town by a river. The child wakes up to the smell of cooking grain. The child runs outside and sees the river shining. The child hears adults talking about the planting season. The child does not know about climate cycles or far-off volcanoes. The child only knows the world as it is today. Years pass. The child grows. The child becomes a worker, maybe a potter, maybe a farmer, maybe a builder. The river still runs. The fields still grow. There are festivals. There are arguments. There is laughter. There is life. Then one year the river floods too high. The child, now a young adult, helps move baskets to higher ground. The flood recedes. Mud is everywhere. The town smells strange. People rebuild. Then, a few years later, another flood comes, worse, or maybe a drought comes instead, and the river shrinks. The young adult becomes older. The worries grow heavier. The grain stores feel smaller. People blame each other. The leaders demand more or offer less. Some families leave. Finally, one day, the person stands in the doorway of their home, looking at the river, thinking about leaving too. They touch the wall they once helped plaster. They look at the place where their child slept. They feel the pull of memory and the push of survival. They make a choice. They pack what they can carry. They walk away. Later, the home collapses. A flood lays down silt. The doorway fills with mud. The wall falls inward. Another layer forms. The person's footsteps vanish. The town becomes a mound. Time presses down. The buried clock ticks. Much later, someone digs and finds the floor of that home. They find broken pottery. They find a hearth. They find seeds. They find the quiet shape of a life. The child of the past is gone, but the layers remember their everyday world and the day it began to change. When people hear about lost civilizations, some want one big answer. They want one secret cause that explains everything. A single comet. A single ancient superscience. A single hidden enemy. Big answers feel satisfying, like closing a book with a slam. But the past is usually softer and more complex. It is often many causes together: nature and humans, weather and politics, trade and war, disease and farming, mistakes and bad luck, like a rope made of many threads. When enough threads fray, the rope breaks. The buried clock does not often support simple stories. Layers show complexity. You might find evidence of drought, but also evidence of internal conflict. You might see a flood layer, but also signs that people had already begun to leave before the flood. You might see an ash layer, but also signs the society returned and rebuilt afterward. The past is rarely neat. Still, it is okay to wonder. Wonder is how questions start. The key is to keep wonder gentle and careful, to let the evidence lead, to accept that some mysteries may stay partly open, to be comfortable with quiet answers. This is especially important for sleep storytelling. We are not chasing a loud conspiracy. We are drifting through evidence like lantern light moving across cave walls. We are letting the mind relax into curiosity, not tension. The question is big, but our voice can stay calm. Caves are special places for memory. They are sheltered. They stay cooler. They protect layers from wind and rain. In caves, you can find signs of ancient fires, layers of ash and charcoal, stone tools, bones, and sometimes art on walls. If a cave was used for thousands of years, the floor can become a layered record of human presence. A cave can show when people visited more often or less often. It can show changes in diet through animal bones. It can show changes in tools. It can show times when the cave was empty, maybe because the region was too cold, too dry, too dangerous. These empty times can be as important as the busy ones. Gaps in layers are like pauses in a song. In some caves, you can find thin layers of ash separated by thin layers of dust, like alternating stripes, each one a different season or a different year of use. If you imagine each ash layer as a night where people gathered around a fire, then a cave floor can feel like a calendar of campfires. The buried clock is not always grand. Sometimes it is simply a record of warmth in darkness, repeated over and over until it stops. In many regions, ancient towns became hills over time. People built with mud brick. Mud brick is strong enough to build homes, but it can crumble. When walls crumble, people often build again on top, using the same space, because the location is good. Over generations, the town rises. It becomes a mound with layers of homes stacked like nesting bowls. When archaeologists dig into such a mound, they can follow the town's life like a biography. Early life, when the settlement was small. Growth, when houses became larger and more complex. A rise, when trade goods appear, when craft work becomes specialized, when walls are built. Challenges, when layers show destruction by fire, or hurried rebuilding, or sudden changes in food. Turning points, when styles change, when a new group seems to take over, when a new kind of pottery appears, when writing begins or ends, and sometimes a final layer, when the town is abandoned. This is where our documentary becomes a journey through many lives at once. Not one hero, but a whole community is the main character. The mound is their body, the layers are their memories. The buried clock ticks in each rebuild, each fire, each flood, each quiet year. And the long-term impact can be seen too. Later societies may return. They may use the mound as a fort because it is high. They may dig into it without knowing what it is, taking old bricks for new walls. They may tell stories about it. The mound becomes part of the landscape, and the landscape shapes the future. If Earth is a library, it is not arranged by a careful librarian. It is arranged by accidents. A storm, a quake, a landslide, a fire, a slow drift of sand, a sea that creeps higher, a river that jumps its banks. Each accident writes a new layer. Each accident can erase a page and write over it. That is why some times are hard to study. Some chapters are torn. Some pages are missing. Still, what remains can be enough. A broken pot can tell you people cooked food. A pile of shells can tell you they gathered from the shore. A stone blade can tell you they hunted or cut plants. A bead can tell you they cared about beauty. A child's tooth can tell you about diet and health. A burial can tell you about love and grief. The buried clock is made of these small truths. It does not always tell us names. It does not always tell us songs. But it tells us that people were there. That they lived in a world that changed. That they tried to meet that change. One of the hardest parts of studying lost civilizations is noticing absence. It is easy to notice a big ruin. It is harder to notice a missing pattern. How do you prove that something used to exist if it left no stone walls? How do you show a society that built mostly with wood which rots? How do you find a village that was washed away? Sometimes, absence is shown by tiny things. A sudden drop in charcoal layers might mean fewer fires, fewer people. A change in pollen might mean farms stopped. A shift in animal bones might mean hunting changed, or people moved. A break in pottery styles might mean trade ended or people left. A layer of wind-blown sand inside a house might mean the roof was gone and the place stood empty. These are gentle clues. They require patience. They require careful thinking. They also require honesty, because absence can be tricky. A missing clue does not always mean a missing people. Sometimes it means the evidence was destroyed. Sometimes it means we have not found the right site yet. Sometimes it means we're asking the wrong question. This is one of the failures that can happen in this field. A team may chase a theory, dig for years and find little. Funding may end. People may lose hope, but even failure can teach. It can show where not to look. It can show limits. It can push people to invent new methods. In that way, the search for the buried clock has its own life story too, with rises and falls, hopes and disappointments, and the long, steady work of learning. Now let us imagine a different kind of event, one that does not happen often, but leaves a wide mark, a huge eruption in a far place. The sky turns hazy, the sun looks pale, summer feels cooler, crops struggle. Rain patterns change, people do not see the volcano, but they feel its reach. They may not know why the air tastes strange or why the harvest is poor. They only know that something is wrong. In layers, such a moment might show up as an ash stripe, and also as signs of stress in human settlements around the same time. Maybe more conflict, maybe more movement, maybe more abandoned fields. The buried clock might show a tick that echoes across regions. This is where the idea of a timetable feels strongest. Not because fate planned it, but because nature can create big ripples that touch many shores. When that happens, human societies, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, respond in different ways. Some hold strong, some adapt, some break. The layers later show the results. But we must be careful. Not every hard time is caused by a volcano. Not every collapse lines up with ash. The past has many kinds of trouble. Still, the possibility remains, quiet and haunting, that some chapters of human history were shaped by events people did not understand, events that came from far away and moved through the sky like invisible hands. In modern times, new tools began to reveal hidden shapes under the ground without digging everything. People used radar and other methods to see walls under soil. They used satellite images to spot patterns in deserts and fields. They used careful surveys to map mounds and ruins. They used computers to store and compare data from many sites. Slowly, a new kind of map formed. A map beneath the map. This changed the story. Instead of finding one site and treating it like the whole past, researchers could begin to see networks, roads connecting towns, fields spreading around cities, changes in settlement patterns over time. They could see how a region grew, how it reached a peak, and how it thinned out. 5. This is like watching a candle burn. At first, a small flame, then brighter, then steady, then flickering, then dim, then out. The map beneath the map can show that flicker. It can show where people moved when trouble came. It can show refuges, it can show bottlenecks, it can show how geography shaped choices. And it adds a new layer to our idea of the buried clock. Because now we are not only reading layers in one place, we are reading layers across whole landscapes, across whole regions, as if Earth is a huge book with many pages open at once. When we say lost civilizations, it can sound like they vanished completely, like smoke. But often, people do not disappear. They move, they merge. They change their language, they change their leaders. They become part of something new. The city may fall, but the people may live on. In villages, the palace may burn, but the farmers may keep planting. The writing may stop, but the songs may continue. In that sense, lost can mean lost to our sight, lost to our records, lost to big buildings. It can mean the end of one style, not the end of human life. The buried clock might show a collapse of a system, not a wipeout of a population. This matters because it changes the mood of the story. It becomes less like a horror tale and more like a story of transformation. Still, transformation can be painful. It can involve hunger, fear, and loss. It can involve leaving graves behind, leaving temples behind, leaving homes behind. Even if people survive, a way of life can die. So when we ask if the layers hide a timetable of lost civilizations, we are also asking about the timetable of change. When did cities rise? When did they shrink? When did people gather? When did they scatter? When did systems become too heavy to carry? The answer may not be a single timetable, but many overlapping rhythms, like many quiet drums, some fast, some slow, echoing through the ground. Every long journey has a middle point where the traveller feels tired. In our story, this is the moment when the evidence feels both rich and confusing. We have layers, we have dates, we have ruins, we have climate records, we have stories of floods and droughts, we have patterns that seem to line up, then patterns that do not. We have strong theories and weak ones. We have careful work and wild guesses. In this middle space, doubt appears, not as an enemy, but as a guide. Doubt asks, are we seeing a pattern because it is real, or because we want it to be real? Doubt asks, are we treating nature as the main cause and forgetting human choices? Doubt asks, are we ignoring places where societies survived and focusing only on collapses? Doubt asks, are we missing the quiet resilience of people? This is a turning point. If the question about the buried clock is going to mature, it must pass through this doubt. It must become wiser. It must learn to hold two truths at once: that Earth records events in layers, and that human life is complex and cannot be reduced to one simple rule: that climate matters, and that culture matters, that disasters happen, and that people adapt. A good documentary does not hide doubt. It makes room for it. It lets it breathe. It lets the viewer relax, knowing they do not have to pick one perfect answer tonight. They can simply listen, wonder, and feel the slow rhythm of deep time. Now, in the calm of our sleep story, let us introduce a figure. Not a single named hero, but a kind of character that appears again and again in this field. A researcher who was once a child who loved stones. They grew up picking up rocks in the yard, turning them over, noticing lines and colours. They asked questions that adults could not answer. They kept asking anyway. As they grew older, they learned about layers. They learned about fossils. They learned about ancient tools. They learned to be patient. They learned that truth is not won by shouting, but by careful steps. They studied. They joined digs. They spent long days under the sun brushing dirt from objects, labeling bags, recording measurements. They spent long nights reading papers, comparing notes, arguing kindly with colleagues, changing their minds when evidence demanded it. They faced challenges. Funding runs out. Storms damage sites. Politics makes regions dangerous. Rumours spread. People accuse them of hiding secrets. Others accuse them of chasing myths. Sometimes they feel lonely because they live with deep time in their thoughts while the world around them races. They have turning points too. A discovery in a trench, a new method that reveals a hidden wall, a date that changes a whole timeline, a collaboration with climate scientists that opens new doors, a failure that forces them to rethink everything. This researcher, this stranger in the soil, becomes our guide. Through their eyes, we learn how the buried clock is read, how hard it is, how beautiful it can be, and how it can break your heart, because it shows you how often people have had to start again. There is a special moment on a dig when the ground seems to speak. It might happen when a wall line appears in the dirt, the straight edge that no river would draw, or when a layer changes suddenly from dark soil to pale sand, showing a shift in environment, or when a piece of pottery emerges, painted with a pattern that matches a known culture, or when a seed is found, burned in an old hearth, still shaped like a seed, small and perfect. The team grows quiet. Even the ones who joke often become still, because this is contact. This is the past reaching out, not with words, but with presence. A real object, touched by real hands long ago. A message that says, we were here. In that moment, the buried clock feels real. Not as a big theory, but as a simple fact. Time passed. People lived. The earth covered their traces. And now, by chance and effort, the traces are seen again. But what happens next is important. The team must not rush. They must record everything. They must document the layer. They must protect the context, because the context is the story. An object without context is like a sentence without the page around it. It can be misunderstood, so the team works slowly. Brush, photograph, measure, note, bag label, repeat. The pace is steady, like breathing. The work itself becomes a kind of meditation. It is a good rhythm for sleep, because it is careful and repetitive, but not empty. Each step has meaning. After many digs, many cores, many dates, a strange thought can creep in. Not a loud claim, but a hint. What if there are times when many layers around the world show stress signals at once? What if there are periods when droughts cluster, eruptions cluster, cooling events cluster? What if these clusters line up, not perfectly, but enough to suggest the planet has rough seasons that last decades or centuries? What if civilizations, like gardens, bloom best in gentle seasons and struggle in rough ones? It is tempting to call this a schedule, a timetable, a buried clock counting down to collapses, but it might be better to call it a rhythm, like waves. Waves do not plan to crash. They simply follow wind and tide. Sometimes the sea is calm, sometimes it is rough. If you build a house too close to the shore, rough seas matter more. The question becomes softer and deeper. Are civilizations lost because Earth ticks toward destruction, or because civilizations grow in ways that make them vulnerable when Earth shifts? If a society depends on one river, drought is dangerous. If it depends on long trade routes, disruption is dangerous. If it cuts down too many trees, soil erosion is dangerous. If it grows too complex, it may not bend easily. The buried clock might be partly about Earth, and partly about us, about the way humans build and the way nature changes, about how we fit together and where the seams tear. In a lab, a scientist looks at pollen grains under a microscope. Each grain is tiny, shaped like a strange little sculpture. Different plants make different pollen. If you find pollen in layers, you can learn what plants were around at the time that layer formed. This is like reading the past landscape. If pollen shows a lot of crop plants, it suggests farming. If pollen shifts toward wild plants, it might suggest farms were abandoned. If tree pollen drops, it might mean deforestation. If dry-loving plants increase, it might suggest drought. A single grain in that sense can be a witness. It can tell you about fields and forests. It can hint at human activity. It can hint at climate. It can be part of the buried clock's mechanism, a tiny gear in a huge machine. And the feeling of this is strangely comforting. That the past is not only in big stones and grand ruins, it is also in small things, in dust, in seeds, in the quiet remains of a landscape. For sleep, this is a gentle thought. That time can be held in something as small as pollen, and that meaning can be found without loud drama. The world is big, but it speaks in whispers. Now we come to a place in our journey where the ground begins to hint at something sharper. The researcher and their team have been following layers in a certain region, a region where many settlements once thrived. They have mapped old canals. They have found homes stacked into mounds. They have dated charcoal from hearths. They have taken cores from nearby lakes to study pollen and dust. They have compared the evidence to records of climate shifts. At first, the story looks normal. Growth over time. More settlements. More farms. More trade. Then, in the layers, a change begins. A subtle shift. The lake core shows more dust, suggesting drier winds. The pollen shifts, suggesting fewer crops. The soil layers in the town mound show fewer rebuilds. The trash pits show fewer animal bones, as if fewer meals were eaten. A few homes seem to have been left unfinished. The team debates. Is it just a local change? Is it war? Is it drought? Is it disease? They look for signs of burning. They look for weapons. They look for mass graves. They do not find clear proof of sudden violence. Instead, they find a slow thinning, like a candle flame shrinking. Then one day, in a new trench near the edge of the ancient town, a student's brush reveals something unexpected. Not a pot, not a wall, not a tool, but a thin, sharp line of pale material cutting across the darker soil beneath, almost like a scar. The line is too even to be random, too wide to be a simple stain. It looks like a layer laid down fast. The team leans in. The researcher's heart beats faster, but their hands stay steady. They collect a sample. They rub it between fingers. It feels fine, like powder. They look closer. There are tiny glassy bits in it, so small they sparkle when light hits them. The researcher goes quiet. Because they have seen this before, in books, in other sites. They know what this might mean. It might mean ash, volcanic ash. And if it is volcanic ash, it might connect this town's slow trouble to an event far away, an event that could have changed skies and seasons. But the ash layer is not thick. It is not dramatic. It is a whisper of a disaster, not a shout. And that is what makes it unsettling, because a whisper can still change everything. A thin veil in the sky can still ruin crops. A slight cooling can still shorten growing seasons. A small shift in rain can still break a fragile system. The team must test it. They must confirm. They must compare it to known ash signatures. They must date the layers above and below. They must see if other sites in the region have the same line. They must find out if this is the missing link, the hidden tick of the buried clock, the moment when a distant eruption reached this place and tipped a struggling society toward collapse. The sun begins to lower. The trench fills with softer light. The researcher looks at the pale line again, and for a moment it feels like looking at the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing the next step will change the whole path. The researcher tells the team, in a calm voice, to cover the trench carefully for the night, to protect it from wind, to keep it safe until morning. And as they pack up their tools, the researcher cannot stop thinking about that thin line under the soil, that quiet stripe that might connect a town's fading life to a wider rhythm of the planet. In the stillness of evening, as the site grows quiet and the air cools, the buried clock seems to tick a little louder. Not loud enough to wake the world, but loud enough for those who listen to feel it in their bones. As if the earth is about to reveal a chapter it has kept sealed for a very long time. And the next page, the next layer, is waiting just below the brush. Morning comes in a gentle way, with pale light sliding across the ground like a slow hand smoothing a sheet. The site wakes up without hurry. The air is cool and still. Birds call from far off, and the sound seems to hang for a moment before it fades. The team returns to the trench and removes the covers with care, like lifting the lid from a sleeping box. The pale line is still there, clean and quiet, resting in the dark soil like a thin moon in a night sky. The researcher kneels and looks again, not with excitement that jumps, but with focus that settles. This is how real discovery often feels. Not like fireworks, but like a candle being lit in a room you did not know was there. The brush moves again. Soil falls away in soft crumbs. The pale stripe stays steady, holding its shape, holding its promise. The student who first saw it watches closely, feeling a kind of pride mixed with fear, because finding something is not the end. It is the beginning of questions. The researcher takes a small sample and places it in a clean container. They label it with careful writing. Their hands are steady because they have learned that the ground can trick you if you rush. They also know that a thin layer can carry a big story, but only if you treat it gently. The team steps back and looks at the trench wall as a whole. Above the pale line, the soil is darker, mixed with bits of broken brick and charcoal, the kind of soil made by people living, cooking, and rebuilding. Below the pale line, the soil is different, older, packed tighter, with fewer signs of busy life. The line sits between two worlds like a doorway. The researcher feels a quiet tightening inside. The pale layer is volcanic ash. It may mark a moment when the sky changed, when the seasons shifted, when a town already struggling faced a new weight it could not carry. Back at the small field tent, the researcher opens the container and studies the sample. In the hand, the grains feel fine, almost silky. The colour is pale, not pure white, but like old bone. Under a simple lens, some grains catch light in a way that looks glassy. Not like sand from a river, rounded and dull, but like tiny, sharp flakes. The researcher does not speak right away. They have learned that saying a guess out loud can make it feel too real too soon. They prefer to let the work speak first. They pass the sample to a specialist on the team, someone who has spent years studying volcanic ash layers. This specialist has a calm face, the kind that does not give away thoughts quickly. They tilt the sample, watching how it moves. They nod once, slowly, as if greeting an old friend. Then they say, in a voice that stays soft, that it looks promising. Not proven yet, but promising. The researcher feels the moment widen. If this is ash, the next steps are clear. The team must find out which eruption it came from. They must measure its tiny chemistry, because different volcanoes leave different chemical fingerprints. They must compare it to known ash layers from other regions. They must date the soil above and below. They must check other nearby sites for the same line. They must see if this thin stripe is alone or part of a wider pattern. The buried clock has shown them a tick, and now they must learn what time it marks. Samples travel. They move from the open sky of the dig site to the quiet rooms of a lab. They move in padded boxes labelled and sealed. They move with paperwork and care. The lab is a different world, one of humming machines and clean counters. Here, the ash is no longer just a pale stripe in a trench. It becomes data. It becomes numbers on a screen. It becomes tiny images under powerful microscopes. It becomes chemical ratios. It becomes a match or a mismatch. The specialist prepares the ash in a careful way. They separate grains. They clean them. They place them under a microscope and take pictures. The grains look like broken glass, like shattered windows from a tiny house. That is what volcanic ash is. In a simple sense, it is rock turned into dust by explosive force. It is heat and pressure turned into a rain of fragments. Then the ash is tested. The machine reads its chemistry. The specialist compares it to a database, a growing library of ash fingerprints from eruptions across time. Some matches are strong, some are weak, some are confusing. The specialist does not rush to choose. They let patterns emerge like slow dawn light. While the machines work, the researcher waits. Waiting is part of the job. It is part of the story. This is a sleep documentary, and waiting is a gentle rhythm. We do not sprint through time. We let it unfold. The researcher drinks water, checks notes, thinks about the trench wall. They remember the signs of slow trouble in the town layers, the dust in the lake core, the crop pollen fading, the unfinished walls. They wonder if the ash will fit like the missing piece of a puzzle, or if it will be a new puzzle on its own. People name eruptions, droughts, and cold spells, They give them labels so they can talk about them. But the Earth does not know these names. The Earth simply changes. Still, names help us hold complex things in our minds. When an ash layer matches a known eruption, it connects a local story to a larger one. It takes a thin, pale stripe in one trench and ties it to a mountain far away that once roared and shook. The specialist finally returns with the first answer, careful and calm. They say the ash looks like it may match an eruption that happened far away, an eruption known to have spread ash across wide areas. The match is not perfect yet, but it is close enough to be taken seriously. The researcher feels a quiet thrill, the kind that sits in the chest and warms it, but does not make you shout. If the match holds, it means the town's trouble might have been touched by a sky event that reached beyond this region. It means the buried clock is not only local, it is connected. It means the layers are speaking across distance. But the researcher also knows that a match is not a full explanation. Ash can be a stress, but it may not be the only stress. The town may have been weakened by drought already. The ash could have been the last heavy stone added to a stack that was already leaning. The story is still forming. The team returns to the lake. Core data, now with fresh eyes. A lake core is like a thin vertical timeline. Layers of mud and silt laid down year after year. In some parts, the layers are clear and fine. In others, they blur, but the core holds clues. Dust levels, pollen types, tiny bits of charcoal from fires, sometimes even microscopic ash. The researcher asks the lake specialist to look again for a matching ash signal. If the eruption truly reached this region, there might be a faint echo of it in the lake mud. The specialist studies the core samples near the time range suggested by the ash match. They search for tiny glass shards, small and sharp. They test. They compare. The lake specialist finds something. Not a thick ash layer, but a gentle rise in volcanic particles, so small that without the new focus, it might have been overlooked. It sits in the same time window. It is like hearing the same note played softly in another room. The researcher feels the evidence gather, like clouds forming. The case is not closed, but it is stronger now. The pale line in the trench is not alone. The lake remembers it too. The buried clock, it seems, has set more than one hand moving. It is easy to imagine volcanic ash falling like snow, but often it travels in a wide, thin veil carried by high winds. People below may not see a storm of ash. They may see a strange haze. They may see sunsets turn red. They may notice the sun looks dim. They may feel colder nights. They may find a light dust on roofs or fields, easy to brush away, yet still harmful in its effects. A thin ashfall can damage crops by covering leaves. It can change soil chemistry. It can irritate lungs. It can harm animals. But the biggest effect may come from the sky itself. Large eruptions can push gases into the upper air, leading to cooler temperatures for a time. Even a small cooling can shorten growing seasons. Even a slight change in rainfall can harm crops in places already dry. The researcher imagines the ancient town. They imagine farmers looking at fields that do not grow as expected. They imagine elders worrying about stores. They imagine leaders trying to keep order. They imagine families weighing choices, stay and hope, or leave and risk the unknown. This is how the buried clock becomes a human story, again confirmed by layers. The ash is not just chemistry. It is fear in a farmer's chest. It is hunger in a child's belly. It is a decision at a doorway. The team decides to expand their search beyond the town mound. If the ash layer is real and region-wide, other sites should show it too. They plan surveys. They walk the landscape, looking for small rises, old canal lines, pottery scatters, and places where ancient people may have lived. They use careful methods, taking small test pits rather than digging wide trenches everywhere. They want to see the pattern without destroying it. In one area, they find signs of a smaller village. There are bits of pottery on the surface. There are stones arranged in ways that feel human. They dig a narrow trench. The soil layers appear. And there it is again, the thin, pale line. Not thick, not dramatic, but present. The team grows quiet. The pattern is spreading. The ash is not just in one town. It is across the region. In another area, near what might have been an old field system, they dig again. The pale line appears once more, like a quiet thread running through the ground. It begins to feel like a seam in fabric, a line where something changed. The researcher takes notes and looks at the map. The ash layer is like a timestamp laid across many places. The buried clock has struck and the sound carried far. With each new ash sighting, the question grows heavier, not because it becomes scarier, but because it becomes more real. A single site can be a strange story. Many sites with the same marker can become a regional chapter, and if other regions also show signs of stress around the same time, the story may grow into a larger rhythm. The researcher feels responsibility. Stories about lost civilizations can easily become loud and careless. People like drama. People like to imagine secret histories. But the researcher wants to stay honest. They want to speak softly and clearly, like a calm narrator in the dark. They want to say only what evidence supports. They want to respect the lives behind the layers. So they talk with the team about language. They remind everyone that ash did not kill the civilization alone. They remind everyone that people had agency, that societies make choices, that systems can be fragile for many reasons. They also remind everyone that even if a city was abandoned, the people likely lived on somewhere else. The story is about change, not just endings. Still, the ash line marks something. It marks a moment when the world pressed down, and that matters. The researcher begins to think of the layers as a kind of calendar. Not the neat calendar on a wall, but a ghost calendar, one made of mud and dust. Each layer is a day, a week, a season, a year, depending on how fast it formed. Some years are thick in the record, full of flood silt or building debris. Some years are thin, almost silent. But together, they form a sequence. In the town mound, the researcher sees the calendar of rebuilding. In the lake core, the calendar of climate. In the ash layer, the calendar of a distant eruption. The different calendars overlap. They create a richer picture, like several soft voices singing the same slow melody. This is where the buried clock feels less like a single ticking device and more like a whole orchestra of time. Many instruments, many rhythms, some steady, some sudden, human life moving through it all. The researcher wonders how many times this has happened in history. How many thin lines in the ground mark moments when life changed? How many civilizations met the same kinds of stress in different places at different times? How many people stood in doorways and chose to leave? To keep our journey balanced, we return again to the early life of the region, before trouble, before ash. The researcher and team have enough evidence now to imagine the first settlement here. The river, steady and shining. The floodplain, rich and fertile. People arriving with seeds, tools, and hope. They build small homes, they dig canals, they plant crops, they store grain. They trade with neighbours, they learn the moods of the river. Children grow up here, chasing each other through fields. They learn to shape clay into bowls. They learn to sing songs that match the planting season. They see travelers bring goods from far away. The town grows. With growth comes complexity. Leaders organize canal repairs. Scribes keep track of stores. Markets become busy. Crafts become specialized. The town becomes a node in a network, connected by roads and river paths. This is the rise. It is not a sudden rise. It is gradual, like a tree growing ring by ring. The layers show this rise as thicker building debris, more pottery, more animal bones, more signs of trade goods. The buried clock ticks steadily, one layer on top of another, marking the town's growing confidence. This early part of the story matters because it shows what is at stake later. You cannot feel the weight of loss if you do not feel the warmth of what existed. Then the cracks begin, not as a dramatic break, but as small signs. The lake core shows a slight increase in dust. The pollen shifts, suggesting changes in crops. The canal sediments show more silt, as if erosion is increasing. The town mound shows more repairs, as if floods are becoming harder to manage, or as if the labour force is strained. Maybe the river floods too often. Maybe it shifts slightly, making irrigation harder. Maybe the rains fail at the wrong times. Maybe trade routes become less stable. Maybe rival groups compete for resources. Maybe leaders demand too much from farmers. The evidence cannot always tell which came first. Often, the stress is shared and tangled, like roots under the ground. People respond. They reinforce canal banks. They build stronger walls. They store more grain. They pray. They make offerings. They send messengers for trade. They adapt. For a while, it works. The layers show these efforts. The buried clock records not only collapse but resilience. It records the human ability to fight for normal life. Then comes a time when the season feels wrong. Maybe the rains arrive late. Maybe they do not arrive at all. The crops sprout weakly. The grain heads are small. The harvest is poor. People ration food. The next year is not much better. Another poor harvest. Another year of worry. Families who once had extra now have none. Arguments increase. Theft rises. People blame outsiders. People blame leaders. Leaders blame farmers. The social fabric tightens and tears. In the layers, this period may appear as fewer animal bones, fewer signs of feasting, more signs of stress on human remains. It may appear as more movement of people, with fewer houses maintained. It may appear as trash pits used differently, as if habits are changing. The buried clock continues to tick, but the ticks feel heavier, like footsteps in deep mud. It is during this fragile time that the ash arrives, the thin pale line, the distant disaster carried by wind. The researcher tries to imagine the day the ash fell. Perhaps there was no thunder. Perhaps there was no dramatic darkness. Perhaps the sky was just a little hazier than usual, the sun a little dim, the air a little strange. A farmer might have noticed a fine dust on leaves. A child might have drawn a finger through it on a stone. An elder might have looked at the horizon and felt a worry they could not name. A priest might have seen the pale sun and called for prayers. A leader might have thought of enemies, because humans often look for human causes first. Days passed. The dust settled. People wiped it away. But the real change might have been in temperature, in rainfall, in the delicate balance of seasons. That is the cruel thing about some natural events. They do not always strike like a hammer. Sometimes they press like a hand, steady and heavy, until something gives. The ash line in the ground is thin because the event may have been thin in visible form, but its effects could have been wide. The buried clock records this thinness, this subtle power. In the town, leaders gather. They sit in a hall, perhaps with clay lamps flickering. Their faces are tired. They talk about grain stores. They talk about canal repairs. They talk about protecting fields. They talk about keeping order. They may decide to ration food. They may send traders farther. They may demand more labour to strengthen irrigation. They may try to hold the system together by force, or by persuasion, or by prayer, or by all at once. In many societies, when stress grows, leaders face a hard choice. They can loosen control and share burdens, or they can tighten control and demand more. Tightening can work for a short time, but it can also push people away. If farmers feel crushed, they may leave. If soldiers feel hungry, they may revolt. If townspeople feel hopeless, they may stop cooperating. The layers cannot show us the exact words in the hall, but they can show us outcomes. If houses were left unfinished, perhaps labour was pulled away for other tasks. If a district emptied, perhaps people fled. If more fortifications were built, perhaps fear grew. This is where the buried clock feels like a moral lesson too, not because history is simple, but because stress tests character, both personal and social. The ground remembers what the society did when pressed. At some point, the leaving begins. Not everyone leaves at once. Some stay, hoping for recovery. Some cannot leave because they are old or sick. Some leave because they have relatives elsewhere. Some leave because they are desperate. Paths form. People follow canals to other towns. They follow riverbanks. They follow trade routes. They carry what they can. Pots, tools, babies, seeds, memories. They may stop in smaller villages. They may join other groups. They may be welcomed or rejected. For those who leave, the town becomes a memory that aches. For those who stay, the empty streets feel strange. Shops close, markets quiet, festivals shrink. The sense of community thins. In the layers leaving can be seen as fewer objects in later strata. Less rebuilding, less trash, less charcoal from fires. The buried clock does not show a dramatic final moment. It shows a thinning of life. And yet, leaving is not only tragedy, it is also survival. It is the human ability to move, to carry culture in the mind and hands, to plant again elsewhere. The civilization may change shape, but its people may continue. The researcher stands in the trench and looks at the remains of a house. The floor is hard-packed. There is a hearth stain, there are broken pots, the wall line is faint but clear. The ash layer cuts across part of the structure, lying over a patch of floor where dust once settled. The researcher tries to imagine the last day someone lived here. Maybe they swept the floor. Maybe they cooked one last meal. Maybe they argued about leaving. Maybe they promised to return. Maybe they did not. Then the roof fell in, slowly, after seasons of neglect. Wind carried dust inside. Rain washed silt across the floor. The ash line stayed in place, pressed into the soil. The house waited for thousands of years, not knowing it was waiting, simply resting under layers. The researcher feels a soft sadness, not sharp, not painful, but quiet, because this house was once full of life. Now it is a pattern in dirt. The buried clock keeps time without feeling, but we, the listeners, feel it for it. That is part of being human. The researcher knows that to understand whether this ash moment fits a larger timetable, they must look outward. They begin to compare notes with other teams in other regions. They read studies. They attend meetings. They listen to climate scientists. They learn about other sites where stress and change happened around similar times. They hear about places where droughts lasted for years. They hear about rivers that shifted. They hear about cities that were abandoned. They hear about migrations. They hear about new groups rising as others fell. They do not assume all these events are linked. They do not force them into one story, but they pay attention to timing. They ask whether the same climate signals appear in ice cores, lake cores, and ocean sediments. They ask whether known eruptions line up with known disruptions. They ask whether patterns repeat. Slowly a picture forms, not a single clear timetable, but a sense that the world has rough patches, times when nature shifts and human strains meet in dangerous ways. It is like a long ocean voyage. Some seasons have calm waters, some have storms. A strong ship can survive storms. A weak ship may sink, a crowded ship may become chaotic. The sea is the same, but outcomes differ. The buried clock may not say, collapse will happen now. It may say, the sea is rough now. Be careful. In a meeting room, researchers talk. Their voices are calm but firm. One says the ash link is strong and suggests a wider environmental push. Another says human politics could have been the main cause and ash is only a side note. Another says trade changes can explain much of the shift. Another says the drought evidence is the key. The researcher listens. They do not take it personally. They know this is how knowledge grows. By careful disagreement, by testing, by checking. Still, the researcher feels a pressure. They want to share a clear story with the world. People like clear stories. But the truth is often layered, like the ground itself. The best story might be one that accepts complexity, that shows how nature and humans weave together. The researcher thinks of the buried clock again. A clock can be simple, but Earth's timekeeping is not. It is more like a choir of clocks, some fast, some slow, some ticking loudly, some softly. Human societies move within that choir. Sometimes they harmonize, sometimes they clash. The meeting ends. The researcher steps outside. The sky is bright. The ground is quiet. The pale ash line is hidden again under covers at the trench. The clock is buried but not silent. Before any big claim is made, the team must confirm the ash match more strongly. They gather samples from different sites. They test them. They compare chemical fingerprints. They work to rule out other causes, like local mineral deposits that could look pale. The specialist does careful checks. The results come back consistent. The same type of volcanic glass appears across sites. The chemical signature aligns closely with the known eruption fingerprint. The dating of surrounding layers fits the eruption's time window. The lake core shows a matching microash signal. The researcher feels a gentle relief. Not victory, but steadiness. The evidence is real enough to stand on. They can now speak with more confidence. They can say, this region experienced ashfall from a distant eruption around the time the settlements were under stress. They can say, this ash may have played a role in making conditions harder. They can say, it is a piece of the story. This is an achievement. It is the kind of achievement that does not come with cheering crowds. It comes with quiet satisfaction and tired eyes. It comes with the feeling of touching truth through careful work. Not everything fits. The team checks some sites where they expected ash, but they do not find it. Perhaps the ash did not reach there. Perhaps later erosion removed it. Perhaps the soil mixed it away. The absence is frustrating. The researcher feels the familiar sting of uncertainty. They remind themselves that Earth is uneven. Wind patterns vary. Rain can wash ash away in some places and preserve it in others. A thin layer can vanish if conditions are wrong. The buried clock is not perfect. It is a messy record. The team also faces other failures. One trench collapses after heavy rain. A sample is contaminated and must be discarded. A local permit is delayed. A funding source becomes uncertain. These are the ordinary struggles of field science, the kind that do not make headlines but shape what can be learned. Still, the researcher keeps going. They have learned that failure is not wasted, it is part of the path. It teaches caution. It teaches humility. It teaches perseverance. In a sleep documentary, this perseverance is soothing. It reminds us that slow work can still move forward, that patience can build understanding like layers build ground. The researcher begins to focus on something often missed in big stories, small decisions. A family deciding to plant a different crop, a leader deciding to ration water, a community deciding to repair a canal, a trader deciding to take a new route. These small choices can add up. They can make a society more flexible or more fragile. In the layers, small decisions show up as subtle changes. Different seeds, different animal bones, different pottery styles, different building repairs. The buried clock records not only disasters, but choices. This matters because it brings dignity to the past. It shows that ancient people were not helpless. They were thoughtful. They tried. They made plans. They adapted. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they did not. But they were not simply swept away like leaves. The long-term impact of their choices can be seen in what came after. If people migrated, they carried skills to new places. If they changed crops, those crops might spread. If they changed tools, those tools might become common. Even in collapse, there can be legacy. The buried clock is not only a record of endings, it is a record of continuity through change. The team explores downstream, where the river widens. They find evidence of later settlements there. Younger layers with different pottery, different building patterns. It looks like people moved toward more reliable water. The timing suggests that as the old town thinned, these downstream places grew. This is a turning point in the story. It suggests the civilization did not vanish. It shifted. It relocated. It adapted to the new reality. The researcher feels a quiet joy, not because hardship is good, but because survival is meaningful. The people in the old town may have left, but their descendants may have built a new downstream. The buried clock shows the transition. A thinning layer in one place, a thickening layer in another. In the ground, you can see migration not as a line on a map, but as a change in where layers of human life are densest. It is like watching a lantern move across a dark field. There are things the ground cannot keep: voices, songs, jokes, names. The way a mother held a child, the way friends laughed at the river, the way people prayed at night, these things do not fossilize easily. The researcher knows this, and it makes them careful. They do not want to pretend they can fully bring the past back. They can only sketch it, they can only suggest. But even without songs, the layers can still carry a kind of music. The music of patterns, the rhythm of building and rebuilding, the soft beat of seasons recorded in mud, the occasional sharp clap of disaster recorded in ash, the slow fading of one settlement and the slow rising of another. For sleep, this is comforting. It tells us that the world is full of rhythms and we are part of them. It tells us that time is not only a rushing river, it is also a deep lake holding reflections. As the researcher prepares to share their findings, they think about what it means for people today. It can sound like a warning. Civilizations can be fragile. Climate can shift. Disasters can reach far, systems can break, but it can also be a comfort. Humans have adapted many times. People have survived droughts, floods, ashfalls, and changes. They have moved, they have rebuilt. They have carried knowledge forward. They have learned from the land. They have tried again. The buried clock does not only mark doom, it marks resilience. It marks the courage to keep living even when seasons turn strange. In a calm voice, the researcher begins to write. They describe the ash layer, the lake core signals, the settlement changes. They describe the likely sequence: rising stress, thinning harvests, ashfall, worsening conditions, migration downstream. They do not claim more than evidence supports. They do not sell a fantasy. They offer a careful story, layered like the ground. When the work is published and shared, the public reacts in many ways. Some are fascinated, some are skeptical, some are excited and want to turn it into a grand mystery. The researcher watches this with mixed feelings. They give interviews, they speak plainly. They say the ash is one part of a complex story. They say the evidence shows stress and change. They say the people likely moved rather than vanished. They say Earth's layers can keep a timetable of events, but it is not a perfect schedule, and it does not predict exactly. Some listeners accept this calm truth. Others want bigger claims. This is always the struggle when science meets imagination. Imagination wants a dragon. Science offers footprints. The researcher stays steady. They have learned that truth does not need to shout and speak softly, like a thin ash line in dark soil. After the season ends, the team leaves the site. The trenches are covered, the tools are packed, the mounds and fields lie quiet again. The river flows as it has for ages. The sun rises and sets. Wind moves grass. The land does not care about papers or debates. It simply continues. Under the covers, the layers rest. The pale ash line is hidden again. The town's floors and hearths return to darkness. The buried clock keeps ticking, not because it is alive, but because time does not stop. The researcher, back home, sometimes dreams of the trench wall. They see the band of soil and the pale stripe. They feel the hush of the past. They feel the weight of so many lives layered under their feet. They fall asleep with a sense of being small, but also connected. Months later, while reviewing data, the researcher notices something else. In some samples alongside volcanic glass, there are tiny particles that do not fit easily. They are not common local minerals. They are rare, and the specialist is not sure what they are. They might be from a different source, maybe another eruption, maybe a distant dust event, maybe something else carried by wind. The researcher feels a familiar stirring. One answered question often opens another. The buried clock is generous that way. It gives a clue, then points to a deeper lock. They contact another lab, one that specializes in these rare particles. The lab agrees to test. Samples are shipped. Weeks pass. The researcher waits again, patient as a person listening to rain. The results come back with a surprise. The particles appear to match a known event in the wider climate record, a period when dust storms increased across large regions, tied to a shift in weather patterns. If this is correct, it means the town's stress may have been part of not only an eruption moment, but also a broader dry phase that touched many lands. The researcher sits quietly, letting the idea settle. The buried clock may not be a single hand pointing to a single cause. It may be multiple hands moving together, marking overlapping stresses. Drought pressure, dust pressure, ash pressure, human system pressure, a stack of stones leaning under many weights. The story is growing again. The researcher begins to gather data from far places. They look at other regions with similar timing of stress. They compare climate records. They compare archaeological timelines. They do this carefully, aware of the risk of forcing patterns, but they also know that patterns can be real, and ignoring them would be a loss. They find hints. Another region shows a drought signal in lake sediments around the same time. Another region shows settlement changes. Another shows evidence of increased dust. The connections are not perfect, but they are intriguing. The researcher imagines the planet as a set of linked systems. When oceans shift temperature, winds shift. When winds shift, rains shift. When rains shift, rivers shift. When rivers shift, farms struggle. When farms struggle, societies strain. The buried clock in one region may echo the buried clock in another, like distant drums beating in the same slow rhythm. The researcher feels both excitement and caution. This is the edge of a bigger claim. This is where a careful scientist must walk slowly. As the researcher prepares a new study, focused on the rare dust particles and the wider climate shift, they decide to return to the original town mound in the next field season. There is one area they did not dig deeply before, near what might have been a central public space. If the collapse story is true, this area might hold evidence of how the community responded in its final years. Maybe there are signs of food storage changes. Maybe there are signs of conflict. Maybe there are signs of a last rebuilding effort. Maybe there is evidence of a planned migration. The new season begins. The team arrives. The sun is warm. The land is familiar. They open a new trench. Soil comes away in calm strokes. Layers appear one by one like pages turning. They reach the time of stress. They see fewer signs of wealth. They see simpler pottery. They see repairs that look rushed. Then they reach the ash line again, pale and thin. They document it. They move below it into older layers, and as they do, the soil changes in a way they did not expect. A darker band appears beneath the ash, not a normal living layer, but a thick smear of charcoal and burned debris. It is heavier than the usual half stains. It is spread wide as if many things burned at once. The researcher's breath slows. They look at the charcoal band. They look at the ash band above it. Two sharp marks close together in time, like two strikes of a bell. The researcher feels a quiet shock, because earlier they thought there was no clear sign of sudden violence or fire. But here, under the ash, is a burned layer that suggests a major event. It could be an accidental fire during hard times. It could be conflict. It could be a last desperate act. It could be something else. But it is big enough to change the story. The team grows silent, sensing the weight of it. The researcher reaches out and touches the edge of the burned layer with a gloved finger. Charcoal stains the glove. The smell is faint but real, like old smoke held in stone. And as the sun lowers again and shadows stretch across the trench, the researcher realizes they are standing at the edge of a new mystery, one that may reveal whether the town's end was only a slow fading under climate stress, or also a sudden rupture of fire and fear hidden until now beneath the pale ash line, waiting for the brush to uncover it. The burned band sits beneath the pale ash like a secret kept under a soft blanket, and for a long time the team does not speak much, because words can feel too loud beside something so old. The charcoal is not just a little stain from a cooking fire. It is thick and spread wide, as if many rooms burned close together, as if smoke once pressed into the sky for hours or days. The researcher feels that old smoke in the mind not as a smell now, but as an image. They picture rooftops catching, beams cracking, sparks lifting in the wind. They picture people shouting, carrying water, pulling children by the wrist, trying to save what can be saved. Then they picture the quiet after, when ash drifts down, and the air cools, and the town tries to decide what comes next. The team begins the careful work that follows any sudden discovery. They clean the trench wall with soft brushes until the line between layers is clear, and they record the burn band in detail. They do not hurry, even though their hearts want to. They treat the burned layer like a fragile letter, because it is. It is a message from a day when everything changed. The researcher knows that if this burn band is real and widespread, it could shift the whole story from a slow fading into something sharper, a turning point with flames at its center. The buried clock has revealed a second hand, and it is moving faster now. In soil, fire leaves a certain kind of truth. It can blacken floors, it can bake clay walls hard, it can turn wood to charcoal, it can crack stones, it can melt small bits of glassy material. It can leave behind a layer that looks like a dark smear, sometimes mixed with collapsed building debris. The team looks for these signs with careful eyes because fire can be tricky. A kitchen fire can look dramatic in one small room. A city-wide fire has a different signature. It spreads across space, not just depth. They widen the trench a little, still keeping it narrow enough to protect the site. As they scrape gently, they find more charcoal, more burned debris, and in one spot, a patch of clay that has been heated so strongly it has turned reddish and hard like pottery. The specialist on the team touches it and nods. This was not a small cooking accident. This was intense heat. The researcher feels a quiet weight settle. If the town burned, then the question becomes sharper. Who burned it? Why? And when? The researcher does not jump to invasion. Fire can come from many causes. In hard times, people may burn fields by accident. In drought, everything becomes dry and ready to ignite. A strong wind can turn a spark into a disaster, but the timing matters. The burn band is below the ash line. That means the fire happened before the ash fell, or at least before the ash settled into the layers as it did. So the town faced flames, and then later faced the thin ash fall and its climate pressure. Two blows close together, like a person already stumbling when a second push comes. The team searches the burned layer for small objects that can speak. They find broken pottery, but that alone is not enough. Pottery breaks in normal life too. They find animal bones that look more scattered than usual, as if a storage area was disrupted. They find a few small beads rolled into corners of collapsed debris. They find a thin copper piece bent by heat. The researcher's mind begins to picture panic and hurried movement. Then, in a careful square near the center of the trench, the student's brush reveals something that makes everyone still. It is not a skull or a dramatic artifact. It is a small cluster of charred seeds in a pocket, like a handful spilled and burned. Seeds are quiet witnesses. If these seeds were meant for planting, it suggests a season that never came. If they were stored food, it suggests a store that was ruined. The researcher asks the seed specialist to examine them closely. The specialist says they might be a grain used for staples, and if so, their presence in this burned pocket could mean a storage jar broke in the fire. The researcher feels the story tightening. Fire did not just burn walls. It burned food. It burned plans. It burned tomorrow. Now the team must do something slow and careful. They must date the burned layer. Charcoal is useful for dating because it holds carbon from the time it was alive, but charcoal can also be tricky. Old wood can be burned later, making a date older than the fire, so the team tries to find short-lived plant material, like small twigs or seeds, that would give a closer date to the burning event. They collect samples with steady hands and mark exactly where each one came from in the layer. Back in the lab weeks later, the dates begin to arrive. The researcher reads them in silence. The burn event clusters around a time that matches the early stress signals in the lake core, and it sits not long before the ashfall. The spacing is close enough to feel like a 1-2 rhythm. Stress builds, fire hits, ash follows. The buried clock ticks with 2 sharp beats. The researcher does not yet know what caused the fire, but they can now say something important. The town's final struggle was not only slow, it included a sudden catastrophe. And in human history, sudden catastrophes often happen when systems are already strained, when people are tired, when trust is thin, when resources are short. A single spark can become a citywide tragedy when everything is brittle. The team returns to the question they once set aside. Could there have been conflict? Earlier, they found no clear signs of battle, no obvious weapons piled in the streets. But conflict does not always leave neat signs. Sometimes it looks like a burned district. Sometimes it looks like hurried repairs. Sometimes it looks like people hiding valuables. Sometimes it looks like a town that empties quickly. So the researcher begins to look for indirect clues. They examine bones from the late layers, searching for injuries. They examine building patterns, searching for fortifications or blocked doorways. They study the distribution of burned debris, searching for areas that burned more than others, as if fire spread from an attack point. In a nearby trench, they find a late wall built in a rough hurry, not as neat as older construction. It is thicker, more defensive. It blocks what once might have been an open path. The researcher's chest tightens again. Defensive building suggests fear. Fear suggests threat. Threat could be from outsiders, or from internal unrest, or from simple desperation, as neighbours compete over water and grain. The buried clock does not say the word war. It shows signs that people prepared for something, and then something happened. When food is plenty, societies can afford kindness. When food is scarce, kindness becomes harder, not because people become evil, but because survival presses in. This is true now, and it was true then. The researcher thinks about the seeds burned in the pocket. They think about the thinning harvest signals. They think about dust in the lake core. They think about the ashfall that might have cooled the seasons. Hunger can turn small disputes into big fights. It can turn neighbours into enemies. It can make people take risks they would never take in calmer times. The researcher imagines a town where grain stores are low. Perhaps leaders try to control distribution. Perhaps some people feel cheated. Perhaps resentment grows. Perhaps a group attacks a storehouse. Perhaps a fire starts in the chaos. Perhaps the wind spreads it. Perhaps the town burns not because an army arrived, but because society cracked from inside under pressure. This possibility is quiet and painful. It makes the story less like a simple invasion tale and more like a human tragedy shaped by stress. And it fits the layered evidence. Long-term drying, rising dust, a sudden fire event, and then ash, like a sky-level weight added after the social weight had already become too heavy. In many stressed times, people hide valuables. They bury jars of goods under floors. They tuck beads into wall cracks. They hide tools in corners. Sometimes they come back and retrieve them. Sometimes they do not. Hidden caches can become small time capsules of fear. The team searches the late layers for such caches. In one small room, they find a broken pot buried beneath a collapsed floor. Inside are a few beads and a small metal piece. Nothing that would make a modern thief smile, but enough to matter to a person living then. The pot was hidden with care. It was placed under the floor, and then the floor was sealed. The person who hid it expected to return. The researcher holds the beads in a gloved hand and feels a quiet ache because every hidden cache is a promise that went unkept. It is a person saying, "This is not over, I will come back." And the layers say, "No, you did not." the buried clock measures not only years and disasters, it measures broken promises. The team now sees the ash layer differently. Before, it felt like the main dramatic marker. Now it feels like an aftershock. The town burns, then later the ash settles. The ash might have fallen while people were still trying to recover, still trying to rebuild, still trying to plant again. The ash could have cooled the season and damaged crops just when the community needed luck the most. The ash could have been the silent final push that made rebuilding impossible. In the layers above the ash, the team sees fewer rebuild signs. They see more wind-blown dust. They see more hints of abandonment. The story becomes clearer. Fire was a turning point. Ash and climate stress may have sealed the choice to leave. The researcher tries to picture it as a documentary scene in the mind, but without loud drama, people standing on burned ground, looking at fields under a strange hazy sky, feeling cooler air, hearing rumours that other towns are also struggling. They do not know the words volcanic aerosols or climate shift. They only know the harvest is not coming back fast enough. They decide to go downstream, toward more reliable water, toward relatives, toward safety. And the old town becomes a quiet mound, waiting. The researcher returns to the downstream settlements with a new question. Did they grow suddenly after the fire and ash? Did they show signs of incoming people? Did pottery styles shift? Did building methods change? Did population increase? The evidence suggests yes. In the layers downstream, the team sees a thickening of domestic debris after the time of the fire and ash. They see a spread of pottery patterns that resemble the older town's style. They see more hearths, more storage pits, more daily life traces. It looks like people arrived, settled, and began again. This is a gentle kind of happy ending inside a sad story. The old town suffered and emptied, but the people did not simply disappear. They carried their skills and traditions, they reshaped them in a new place. They may have told stories about the fire. They may have told stories about the hazy sky. They may have warned children not to build too close to danger. Their fear became memory. Their memory became culture. The buried clock records this continuity as much as it records collapse. Now the researcher is ready to ask the bigger question again, with more humility. If this region faced a rough cluster of events, drying and dust, a major fire, and a distant ashfall, were other regions facing similar clusters around similar times, not identical but comparable stress patterns? If so, it would suggest that the planet had a rough phase, a period when climate shifts created broad pressure. Civilizations might have responded differently depending on their resilience, geography, and choices, but the timing might show a shared background rhythm. The researcher compares their timeline with other climate records. They look at ice core, signals of volcanic events. They look at lake core drought indicators. They look at ocean sediments that show changes in temperature. They look at evidence from other archaeological regions that show settlement changes. They see hints that the period was indeed challenging in more than one place. Not everywhere, not uniformly, but enough to suggest a broad shift. The researcher is careful. They do not call it a global collapse moment. They call it a time of heightened risk. A time when the buried clock's ticking grew louder in many places. This idea is both unsettling and calming. Unsettling because it means nature can shape human fate in wide ways. Calming because it means the pattern is not personal, it is not a curse. It is a rhythm of Earth, and humans have survived many rhythms before. The researcher's own life changes during this work. They began as a student who loved stones. They grew into a field leader who carries responsibility. Now they become something else too, a storyteller for the public, a person who must translate layers into meaning without turning it into fantasy. They feel the pressure of attention. They get messages from strangers who want them to prove wild ideas. They get criticism from other scholars who worry about overreach. They get invitations to speak. They get questions that repeat the same hunger. So, do the layers prove a hidden timetable of lost civilizations? The researcher learns to answer in a way that is simple and honest. They say the layers do record time. They say the layers can show patterns of climate stress and human change. They say these patterns can repeat because Earth systems cycle. But they also say each society is unique and each ending is made of many threads. They say the buried clock does not control us. It only records the conditions we live in. This is their achievement, not only in data, but in wisdom. They have learned to hold mystery without lying to it, to let wonder live inside truth. Not long after this, the researcher faces a hard moment. A storm hits the region, stronger than expected. Rain falls hard. Water rushes through parts of the site. One trench wall collapses, slumping into itself, mixing layers. It is a painful sight. Weeks of careful work damaged in one night. The team works to stabilize the area, but some context is lost. The researcher feels a wave of frustration. They remind themselves that they are studying time, but they are also at the mercy of time. The same forces that buried the town can disrupt the dig. The earth keeps moving. This failure almost breaks the story for a moment. The researcher worries that the evidence for the burned layers spread will be weaker now. They worry critics will say the context is compromised. They worry about losing trust. But the team adapts. They focus on areas not damaged. They use earlier records and photos. They rely on samples already taken. They seek confirmation in other sites. Slowly the story holds. The buried clock is not ruined by one trench collapse. It is broader than that. The researcher learns a lesson they have learned before, but must learn again. Knowledge is built with patience, and it survives through redundancy, through many lines of evidence, not one fragile wall of soil. Downstream, the new settlements grow. Children are born who never saw the old town. They hear stories instead. They may hear about a great fire. They may hear about a hazy sky. They may hear warnings about drought. They may learn rituals meant to protect crops. They may grow up with new habits shaped by old trauma. Their daily life becomes the next layer. Their half-ash, their broken bowls, their footprints in mud, their canal repairs, their feasts and funerals all become part of the record. The buried clock continues, turning forward. And perhaps, centuries later, these new settlements face their own stress. Perhaps a different drought arrives. Perhaps a different flood. Perhaps a different conflict. Perhaps they too move, leaving behind another mound, another set of layers. Human history is full of movement. We often imagine roots, but humans are also travelers across time. The buried clock does not judge. It simply keeps the timeline. When you think about layers, it can feel like Earth has hands. Not hands like ours, with fingers, but hands made of processes. A river's hand lays silt. A wind's hand lays dust. A volcano's hand lays ash. A fire's hand leaves charcoal. An ocean's hand lays mud. An ice sheet's hand lays snow. These hands work slowly, but they never stop. They are patient. They cover, they press. They preserve, they erase. They reveal. The researcher begins to speak about this in a gentle way in public talks. They tell people to imagine the Earth as a slow storyteller. Not a storyteller that wants to scare you, but one that wants to be understood. They explain that when we read layers, we read not only disasters but daily life. We read how people cared for land. We read how they adapted. We read how fragile complex systems can be. We read how resilience can travel in human memory. For a sleep audience, this idea feels like a soft blanket. The world is old, but it is steady in its rhythms. Our worries tonight are small compared to deep time, and yet our lives matter because we are part of the same long story. The team returns again to the charcoal band, because it may hold another secret. Charcoal can contain traces of what burned. Wood type, plant type, sometimes even hints of resin. If the burned layer includes building beams, it suggests homes burned. If it includes stored grain, it suggests storehouses burned. If it includes reed and straw, it suggests roofs burned. The plant specialist studies the charcoal fragments. They identify some as wood from local trees used for beams. They identify some as reeds used in roofing. They identify some as chaff from grain processing. This mix suggests widespread burning of domestic structures and food-related areas. The fire was not limited to one workshop. It touched the fabric of the town. The researcher feels the story sharpen again. A town-wide fire is a major event. If it was caused by outsiders, it might suggest a raid or attack. If it was caused by internal unrest, it might suggest riot or accident in a tense time. Either way, it shows fragility. The buried clock has recorded a moment when the town's heart, its stored food and shelter, was damaged at once. In some rooms above the burned layer, the team finds something else, objects left behind that people normally take if they leave with time. A useful tool. A personal ornament, a pot that could be carried. Not many, but enough to suggest that at least some leaving happened fast, perhaps after the fire, before people could plan carefully. This does not mean everyone fled in panic. Some may have left later in an organised way, but the evidence suggests the fire forced sudden movement for some families. They may have gone to relatives in nearby villages. They may have camped along the river. They may have returned briefly to salvage. They may have never returned. The researcher imagines that night, flames in the distance, smoke in the throat, children crying, people carrying bundles, walking under stars, not knowing where they will sleep. The image is emotional but not loud. It is the kind of sadness that comes in waves, then recedes. The buried clock holds that night as a thin, dark band. The human mind fills it with life. Now the researcher is asked again by a journalist, in a gentle interview, do Earth's layers hide a timetable of lost civilizations? The researcher pauses. They choose words like stones placed carefully in a path. They say that Earth's layers do keep time. They say layers can show when big climate events happened, when ash fell, when droughts grew, when floods arrived. They say that human societies often respond strongly to these changes, and sometimes those responses include collapse or migration. They say that across history, there are periods when many regions face stress at once, suggesting broad climate shifts. But they also say that a timetable is not destiny. It is not a countdown that forces collapse. It is more like weather seasons on a much larger scale. Some seasons are calm, some are harsh. Civilizations that build flexibility can endure harsh seasons better. Civilizations that are stretched thin may break. The journalist asks if there could have been other civilizations lost without a trace, civilizations older than we know. The researcher says it is possible that some societies left little behind, especially if they use materials that rot, but they also say that extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and that so far, the strongest evidence supports known patterns of human development rather than hidden global super-civilizations. The layers tell many stories, but they do not support every dream. The researcher's voice stays calm. The truth is calm, even when it is deep. The researcher's work begins to influence how others study collapse. Other teams start paying more attention to thin ash layers, to microash in lake cores, to dust signals, to the way multiple stresses can cluster. They begin to build more integrated timelines, combining archaeology and climate science. This is the long-term impact, not just one story of one town, but a method, a way of listening to Earth more carefully, a way of seeing that the buried clock is made of many hands, and that human history is stitched into those hands. In time, this approach helps other regions too. A city once thought to have fallen only to war is reconsidered in light of drought stress. A migration once thought to be only a cultural choice is reconsidered in light of changing rivers. A period once seen as mysterious is given context by ash markers that align distant events. The buried clock becomes a shared tool, not a myth, not a weapon for drama, but a guide for understanding. Back at the site, after another day of digging, the team stands on the mound at dusk. The wind is cool. The river glints in the distance. The land feels wide and patient. The researcher looks down at the trench, now covered again. They think about the burned layer and the ash layer. They think about the people who lived here. They feel gratitude, not because those people suffered, but because their traces allow us to learn. Their lives pressed into soil still matter. The researcher also feels a quiet humility. They know they are reading only a small part of the Earth's record. Many layers remain untouched. Many stories remain buried. The buried clock is vast, and we have only begun to hear its softer ticks. The researcher walks back to camp, and the stars come out one by one. The world feels calm. The story feels deep. Sleep feels near. Late in the season, one more surprise arrives. In a small test pit on the edge of the mound, the team finds a fragment of clay with markings, not full writing, but symbols. They are simple, but deliberate. The fragment comes from a layer close to the burn band. It might be part of an administrative seal or a tag used for storage. It suggests organization, even in stressed times. The researcher's mind lights up softly. If the town had organized storage, then the struggle may have been managed, at least for a while. The burn event might have disrupted not only homes, but the system that kept food and labor coordinated. If an attack targeted storage and administration, it could explain why recovery failed. If internal unrest hit storage, it could explain the same. The fragment becomes a new thread. The researcher knows that if they can find more of these markings, they might learn how the town tried to manage crisis, and how the crisis broke that management. They plan a focused excavation for the next day, right where the fragment came from, to see if there is a larger administrative area buried there. The team goes to sleep that night with quiet anticipation, and beneath them, under blankets and tents, under layers of soil and time, the buried clock continues its slow ticking, holding one more secret in the darkness, waiting for the brush to find it. At the end of our long, quiet journey, we return to the same idea that first pulled us into the dark with wonder. The ground under us is not empty. It is a slow memory, stacked in layers like soft blankets. Each layer is a small moment that settled and stayed. Some layers are calm, made by gentle seasons. Some layers are sharp, made by sudden change. And when we learn to read those layers, we begin to hear a kind of hidden ticking, not loud and scary, but steady and true, like the earth itself is keeping time in its own patient way. We followed one town as if it were a living person. We watched its early life, and the river fed fields and families and made the future feel safe. We saw its growth when work became organized, trade became wider, and daily life filled the streets with simple sounds. Then we felt the challenges arrive, first as small cracks that seemed manageable, then as heavier pressure that made every decision harder. We saw how drought and dust can quietly weaken a place, how hunger can thin trust, and how fear can make people build walls where they once built open paths. And then, when the layers finally spoke clearly, we found the burned band in the soil, a dark scar showing that fire had swept through the town in a moment of panic and loss. After that came the pale ash line, the thin reminder that trouble can also fall from far away, carried by wind, changing skies and seasons at the worst possible time. But the story did not end with vanishing. The layers taught us something softer and more human. They showed that lost often means changed. People can leave a city and still survive. They can carry their skills, their memories, and their way of living downstream into a new place where water is steadier and hope can grow again. In the younger layers, we saw life return, not as a perfect recovery, but as a continuation, like a song that changes its tune but does not stop. This is the quiet strength hidden inside many collapses. Systems can break, but people can adapt. So, do Earth's layers hide a timetable of lost civilizations? The answer, in this calm light, is not a simple yes or no. The layers do keep time, and they do record patterns. They show that the planet has rhythms, seasons of calm and seasons of strain. When dust rises, rain shifts, rivers change, and distant eruptions can touch lands far away. In those strained seasons, civilizations that are stretched too tight can crack more easily. The buried clock is not destiny, and it is not a magic schedule that forces endings. It is more like a long weather record written into stone and soil, reminding us that human life is always living inside nature's bigger movement. And now, as the night grows deeper, we can let that truth settle in a gentle way. Beneath every home, beneath every road, beneath every quiet field, the earth is holding stories. Some are bright, some are sad, some are unfinished, but all of them are real, pressed into layers that wait without anger and without hurry. The buried clock keeps ticking, not to frighten us, but to remind us that time leaves marks, that life is precious, and that even when old worlds fall silent, new worlds can begin again, softly, patiently, one careful layer at a time.